Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome.
Where in the world are you right now, Alex?
I'm on my little island
Hmm.
in what everyone assumes is a sauna, just to really keep the vibes of like how intense this process is and how seriously I take this, sweating inside and out. Right. Trickling in here. We're not going to take too long to wait. Hopefully everyone will join. But thank you all for coming. Very excited for this content. Nicole, I was trying to do a fun AI generated image background. So I had to do like a foggy coastal Maine setting with like a lobster boat with like a lobster or a robo lobster fisherman and like a drone kind of lobster pod situation, just as a nod to my Maine slash AI combo. And the irony is I got the image, but I don't know how to make it as my background. So, you know, we all have our tech abilities and our challenges.
So the most basic tech you didn't get down.
Yeah, the AI part, I could, but not the tech part.
It's great.
Yep.
Perfect.
All right. Let's see. Do we want to give a minute more, or should we just get started with this? All right. Well, let's get started. Obviously, there's a lot of content to cover, so if people join a little bit late, they're still going to get lots out of it. I want to just say, first of all, say thank you to everyone and welcome. My name is Alex Denniston. I'm the Director of Innovation at Factor, and I wanted to just sort of say thank you before we get started. Quick housekeeping items before we jump in. The session is being recorded, but any attendee names are not visible. And then please feel free to utilize the Q&A function if you've got questions as they're coming. I'll try to keep an eye on them and bring them up. I'm joined by Hitesh and Nicole here, and as they're presenting, if you have specific questions, I'll keep an eye on it and throw them out there. To start us off, in addition to moderating this panel, my main job at Factor is actually heading up our Sense Collective program, which is an annual innovation and co-learning community specifically designed for in-house legal leaders who are implementing generative AI. And through those kind of conversations with the general counsel and legal operation leaders, I think like some of the people on this call, we've had a lot of conversations around the challenges of AI adoption. I'm sure none of us have completely solved that. And the technology is advancing rapidly, but the biggest hurdle isn't just having the tool, it's getting people to actually use them in meaningful ways. And AI adoption is both a challenge and a massive opportunity. And we've seen firsthand that a good UX and design is often something that's going to make or break that adoption. At its core, user experience or UX is really about understanding the user. It's about thinking deeply who they are and what they're trying to accomplish, the context in which they work and the challenges they face. So while UX is often discussed in terms of how a piece of software looks or functions, the same principles apply much more broadly too. How people approach technology, how it fits into their existing workflows, and whether it actually solves the problems that they care about. Adoption is not just about building a useful tool or making that tool available. It's about aligning that solution to how users actually work and what they need. So today's conversation is going to focus on that intersection of AI and UX and adoption. And while some of these points are going to be around UX, kind of in the context of AI product design, I think those ideas that we're going to discuss are also just as relevant for how that AI is integrated and implemented and adopted inside the legal teams. So to explore this conversation, I'm excited to be joined by two fantastic experts here. We have Nicole Bradick, who's our global head of innovation at Factor. She was the former CEO of Theory and Principle, so she brings a deep expertise in design and UX specific to the legal field. And then we also have Hitesh Talwar, who's our head of R&D at Factor, resident genius, who is leading our AI-driven technology efforts. So as you see, we've got a deck that Nicole and Hitesh are going to run through. Before we jump into that, I'd like to just start a little bigger picture, maybe with you, Nicole. You've been at the forefront designing legal tech solutions for years. So before we get into specifically AI, can we just take like a step back and do you think, when you think about how legal tools have actually succeeded versus the ones that have struggled, how much of that do you think comes down to UX, and how would you define UX in a way that might make that difference clear?
I would say that like success and failure of a product related to design has really only become a thing over the last like 5+ years. And a lot of that has to do with just like the competition in the market and user expectations that have grown, right? As 10 years ago, people cared about function. They just needed the thing to work. And I think lawyers were used to having really low expectations of the legal technology that they used on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah, we're going to use really slick tech that exists in our like personal lives and the things that we do on the internet, that are related to, internet, like online shopping or, booking travel. But for work, we expect it to be difficult and annoying and terrible. And I think that expectation has shifted dramatically, particularly over the last 5 years. And it really has to do with like market competition, so that we're putting better design products in front of lawyers so they're getting used to better products, and as they get used to better products and easier products, they continue to expect that from new things that are put in front of them. And there's also like just so many solutions solving so many different lawyer problems that there's a struggle of like having all of these different platforms, and if one is extremely challenging to use and the other is easier, they're going to gravitate towards the easier one. So I would say like the issue of adoption and design is fairly new because we have higher expectations.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think the reminder that it's not just kind of the functionality, but how it works and how we interact with it. And I think that that expectation has significantly grown. Hitesh, I'm curious. So, just kind of thinking about the UX and how that might make or break adoption, but with AI, it's also not just about interfaces. We're also designing the way that the system itself is going to function. And one of the things that you mentioned before to me that I thought was really interesting is that one of the biggest challenges with AI adoption is that a lot of people don't actually understand how these systems work. Not the topic of this particular webinar of getting deep into the weeds on that. But when you think about legal teams who are trying to implement AI, what's one maybe fundamental thing that they do need to understand about how AI is designed that's going to directly impact how well it works for them?
Yeah, so AI isn't really traditional software. We're all used to interacting with interfaces where you put in something, you get something back. It's very predictable. You know exactly what's going to happen when you click on a button or fill out a form. Um, with AI, you have things like variability and hallucinations that are actually features that present as bugs, which is really weird, right? And so Andre Karpathy had this tweet in 2023 along similar lines. Um, and really generative AI in general, these are dream machines. You hope that when you prompt and you interact with these things, you steer the dream, you guide the dream to a place where it creates utility. But if you think about a complex system that sort of requires the user to interact with it, and the user might put in something, you don't necessarily have all of the control in the world about how they will prompt or how they will ask for what they need. And you think about what it takes to sort of get that answer back to them or get the outcome back to them, and how you have to sort of traverse this like incredibly complex sort of combination of components where failure modes sort of add up and they aggregate and they stack up. Um, it's almost as if you have to think about the UI for the UX for the AI as well. Um, And so that's been a useful framing for us internally as we think about this. There's obviously how the humans interact with these systems, which is, as Nicole said, as you pointed out, super important. It is in fact one of the most important things. But you know, getting the answer to the user also involves sort of thinking about what you're putting into the AI at the highest level, what the user's putting in, but also how you're sort of dealing with that and how you're utilizing and how you're using that to steer the system to get it to where you want to get it. So it really is a very different paradigm. And so building a reliable solution requires you to account for that inherent sort of variability, that tendency to sort of hallucinate and be psychophantic, um, while also making sure you leverage those things as features, because you don't necessarily want the AI to forget everything it knows about human knowledge artifacts or domains. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we talk a lot about using AI as sort of a thought partner, and you want a thought partner who can kind of stretch the limits and think about all of the different options and not be quite so rigid. So, all right, well, I think that's a great sort of, very high level start. I think what Nicole and Hitesh have prepared, I'm really excited about because I think it's actually much more pragmatic, and I think it has some really interesting sort of pieces that can be really helpful for those of us who are trying to figure out whether we're actually truly designing systems or trying to figure out how to implement. So, Nicole, I'm going to turn it over to you to jump into your content.
Sure. Here we go. Well, we already did the introductions, but by way of a little bit more background. So my company was Theory and Principle. We recently became a part of the Factor organization, which is very exciting for us. But we have been building software products in the legal industry for about a decade, my team, and a big part of our focus is on UX UI. We've always felt like technology can sort of get the job done, but there's so much low-hanging fruit that can be solved through the lens of good design. And over the last 2 years, our focus has really been shifted towards how do we think about designing AI systems, because they are fundamentally different, as Hitesh has indicated, and the way we interact, the whole paradigm of human machine interaction has changed, or has the possibility or ability to change now. And certainly we've had the ability to spend a lot of time with lawyers who are engaging with systems, who are testing systems, trying to understand lawyer sentiment. So a lot of what I'm just going to run through here at the beginning is based on a lot of the research we've been able to do through our work with legal tech companies, law firms, other players in the legal industry, as they're sort of putting out their Gen 1 Gen AI products, and now even moving into their second Gen AI products. So I will tell you that just even over the last 2 years, the way lawyers engage and interact with AI has shifted dramatically. And I think never before have we been in a phase where we're building UIs that need to constantly evolve. And they need to constantly evolve, both as the technology evolves, right? As the work like Hitesh is doing keeps changing, the UI needs to keep changing to support that. But then also as user expectations and sentiment and knowledge and awareness evolves, the UI needs to keep changing as well. And not in the most predictable ways, not really in the ways you might think. So my hope is to just touch on a high level of a lot of these things and then have some discussion. We run a half-day workshop on UX of AI. There's so much to think about and consider. So this is by no means going to be exhaustive. Just trying to get you thinking about sort of the high level issues. So obviously AI has transformed the world of work. I like Hitesh's phrase, they're dream machines, right? These Gen AI machines are dream machines. And so thinking about how do we engage with these dream machines, right? What's the predominant way of engaging with these magical machines? It's mostly been chatbot UX, right? That's been the predominant, and it continues to be the predominant format of how humans are engaging. An open box, a blank screen, an open box is the predominant way in which we've been engaging with these dream machines. And this is I love this post that chatbot UX is the MS-DOS of the AI era. And if you think about it, MS-DOS, it was a command line interface, and yeah, I mean, it doesn't look much different using the old command line interface than working with ChatGPT, right? There's a lot of fundamental differences, right? We don't need to memorize commands, and ChatGPT can understand context, and we can use natural language, those kind of things. But we do need to learn. We need to learn how to prompt. We need to learn how to extract from the system the things that we want, which we used to have to learn the commands. And so there's a lot of questions in the UX community around what is the best way to facilitate the relationship between the humans who need to get the things they want and the machines who are able to do amazing things. And here's my glorious, completely made up chart. I think the tech in the AI space is just, I mean, if you follow the news, it's mind-boggling how fast the tech is evolving. I don't think the design industry or design approach is evolving at the same pace, right? So this is my very non-scientific graph of the gap that exists between how we're designing these systems and where the tech is and is going. And we need to move a lot faster in understanding how humans and AI engage and sort of where along the path they want to interact and engage. And so just to start, like, level set, this is critically important. It's critically important for adoption, and we're just not giving it enough. And I think it's appropriate, for the record. Like, I think, organizations in the legal universe, the first year, we're just kind of like banging on things, like trying to get our arms around, like, what is this tech? What does it do? Let's roll out like a chat UI. Let's just kind of figure it out. Let's develop POCs. Let's do something, which I think is completely appropriate. But I think now we're moving into like, okay, we're getting our arms around what the technology can do. We can kind of get a little like a 3-month line of sight into where it's going, maybe 6 months if we're really paying attention, like Hitesh. And then we can start to think about, like, what is the actual product, right? And I think we need to return back to that thinking of, like, not just what can the shiny tech do, but what is the actual product, which, like Alex was talking about in the beginning, one of the core things that we think about in UX is, who's our user? What problem are we solving? Where in their workflow are we solving for? And what's the most seamless way for us to solve it? So we got to bring that sort of product thinking back into our solutioning instead of just like tech, right? These two things need to happen even more in concert than they ever did before, like Hitesh was indicating, because there's a big part of the work that the engineers are doing that is design. So
Nicole,
it's a dance.
I know it would take a long time to update this chart because it's pretty high tech. If you were to put a human or like a usability line, where are they, like, in between tech and design, or are they lagging design? Like, where is kind of like the everyday user sort of fit on this idea of kind of their progression of growth, do you think?
So are we if we're talking about like lawyer users?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also a range, which I'm going to talk about. And I put them on a range of like power users versus casual users. And I would say most lawyers are still in the casual user range, which means they need very intuitive UIs, right? Like they need ways to engage that are super seamless and super intuitive. Once you move towards like the power user, the people who truly, like Hitesh was saying, the people who truly understand how the technology works, how to engage with it, how to extract what you want from it, those power users need less of a controlled UI or a seamless UI. And so I get into that a little bit as we go forward. But yeah, don't mess with my chart. It's perfect. So just a couple of like high level thoughts from some of the research that we've done over the last year. Like I said, we spent a lot of time in rooms with lawyers, both testing sort of custom solutions, but also testing like the Harveys of the world and the Paxtons of the world and the co-counsels and that sort of thing. And even Microsoft Copilot. And sort of like some of the core learnings are that lawyers don't want general purpose tools. If you, and that's a struggle with a lot of the off-the-shelf solutions that exist, right? Because a litigator is going to use things much differently than a transactional lawyer. A person who works in procurement is going to use something a lot differently than a person who works in IP. And so having like the open box type solution that can do all the things tends to be the more challenging, less desirable type of solution for attorneys. Ideally, in their dream world, they don't have new platforms, which like there was a time like a year ago where it was like truly platform mania. Like everybody was testing. And if you guys are working in AI or in innovation, I'm sure you are like the demos don't stop, right? Like you're probably constantly testing and trying new products. Lawyers just don't have a lot of extra time to learn new solutions. And this is why like the use of Microsoft Copilot is so high, because it's there, right? It's integrated, it's in their workflow. So ideally, like this quote from a litigation partner at an AmLaw 100 firm, the ultimate dream is not having a separate AI platform interface, right? taking advantage of what AI has to offer without having to log into somewhere else. And then the third is that lawyers tend to be universally disappointed with the outputs of the commercial tools. And again, I'm talking about like the off-the-shelf, the ones you can purchase, even the legal specific ones. I think this to me is really a signal that there's still a lack of comprehension as to how the tool works, how probabilistic systems work, and sort of setting the appropriate expectations within those tools, which are all things we're going to get into. They accept that AI is going to be part of their lives. They accept that they're going to have to get used to it, but they're not happy with the outputs yet, generally. So then when we talk about, so what are the more solvable barriers to adoption and to use? Because all of those things I'm talking about are like really core barriers to adoption. Like a lot of the quotes that I have coming out of that research is like, yeah, I tried it, it wasn't, and then I stopped. Like that is so common. I tried it, I didn't like the outcome, too hard to log into a new platform, so then I stopped. Like there's no stickiness that's like the biggest struggle right now. But I think a lot of these are really solvable. And sort of some of the high points I'm going to touch on is, again, this issue of over-platformification, which is another thing I invented. Maybe somebody else has said it before, probably, but I don't know, it sounds nice. Chatbot friction, mistrust, and just not knowing when or where to use AI. So I'll walk through these things a little bit. For some of them, I'll give you sort of like the design perspective, and Hitesh will come in with the engineering perspective. And so we'll kind of go through these, and then we'll kind of open up to questions and more open discussion. Another one of my brilliant artwork. You guys should know that I have a full design team. Obviously, we're very design focused, but I don't let them touch my slides to their dismay. So this is my work, not the output of my team. So over-platformification, like I said, is an issue, right? And I think one of the ways that we have addressed this is that what's happening a lot is we're purchasing a solution, or we're building a solution, and we're rolling it out to everyone, and we're saying, here is the solution to X, and now you all have it. One of the things that we have found to be like absolutely critical in this new AI universe, where we really have a lot of point solutions, is to further segment our user population. I think within a legal organization, it's very easy to say, oh, well, we have partners and associates, or we have people who work in procurement and people who work in like BAU stuff, or we have people who work in, on the sales side versus, this side, or, we sort of break them down by subject matter. Which might be good by like level of seniority or subject matter. Like there are sort of natural ways to break up a legal organization, but those might not naturally be the ways that you break up users and how they engage with the system. And so one of the things to think about is truly like how can you perceive of your users in different buckets? And they're going to use it differently. And the very first way is the power user versus the casual user, right? Power user versus casual user are going to be very, very different types of people, and they're going to have different needs, and they're going to want the system to appear to them and engage with it in different ways. So you might need different types of interfaces for the same software, right? For some of your more casual users, you might not want to interface at all. Like the AI, you might want it to be completely invisible to them, right? It might be something that is just exists within something they're already doing, and they don't even know it's happening. An example of that in like the e-commerce world is, you do searches on a website, and so that another site knows to like recommend certain things to you, right? That's an invisible AI, right? You're not engaging, you're not putting in anything, you're not asking for an output. But a more casual user might benefit from an AI without even having any interface. So sometimes it's really about segmenting those. So here I just put this random example. A power user in this fake universe would require advanced features, sufficiently motivated to access the platform through a separate URL and log in. These are the people who are coming in every day, saving tons of time, mastering prompts, you can give them a very different product. User 2, casual procurement user. This user only needs the product to appear only when creating certain types of documents that are triggered by the creation of an NDA. So there may be different like trigger points for when some interface to your product or to your solution might exist. And if we have it there all the time, they're going to get annoyed and not use it. So there may be just like these moments that we find in order to show the user this product or to make it available or to have it be, have the function exist for them. Versus like another casual user, but then we're going to break it down by like their actual work, the actual work they're doing. So that I'm just making it up, right? The casual IP user, they need intense use of the application. So they'll use it like a ton on like a ton of agreements, but only during like spikes of activity, right? So they might need a completely different way to interact. So I think one of the most useful starting points to solve the sort of over platformification problem is to break down your users. So then you can really start thinking about like who needs to access this when and where. So that's usually like, that has been our starting point. Hitesh, this to you.
Yeah, sure. So really, just building on what Nicole was saying, a lot of this is also about how you design the AI system. There are things that you can do to reduce the need for a user to come in and know exactly what they want to get out of the system. And it's worth exploring those design patterns as you're building, especially solutions that are meant for more long horizon tasks. And then the other thing we've seen, because now everything is an agent, right? Like everything is an agent. The same thing that existed 6 months ago is today an agent. And so there doesn't, even within a single solution, you often tend to see like multiple hundreds, dozens of
Sorry.
just that's all right, widgets. And that makes it very difficult for a user to sort of know where to start. So you kind of need some sort of discovery mechanism to actually get them to where they need to get. You also see sort of situations where and this is not this is obviously also a UI UX problem for the user, but to actually use the AI, you have to spend time configuring your standards into the solution and maintaining them on the platform. And really, if you think about somebody who just wants to come in and get their work done faster, that's just a huge burden, right? Like prompting is fun for me and my team because we want to talk to AI all the time and we want to build these things that solve problems. But for someone that just wants a contract reviewed, they don't want to have to set up their playbook and the hundreds of standards that they want to sort of review that contract against on a platform. And then lastly, the switch to sort of more agentic, long horizon capable engines does present opportunities to abstract away some of that friction. What AI is also remarkably good at, if engineered and sort of presented correctly, is understanding the user's intent. And so it's worth thinking about that. How can you use AI to reduce the burden on the user? Because you want to make it as easy as possible for them to go from the thing that they want to getting it, without having to think very hard about how they structure that prompt or, whether they tell the AI that it will be fired or whether it needs to think step by step. And if it's a reasoning model, it shouldn't think step by step. Those are all things that are friction. Yeah, Nicole, back to you.
Which Hitesh can also involve with these agentic systems, having the system, the agent itself go across the systems for you, right? So that also helps solve your
Absolutely.
platform.
Yeah, that's been a big capability shift. For a while there was some noise about, the models not getting better. But for those of us building in the space, their ability to use tools and make those decisions about the sequence in which they use them, that is something that has been getting progressively better, even over the last 2 years, where I think the biggest jump we saw, if you were just interacting with these things through a chat interface, was the reasoning models dropping in September. But there's been a ramp up in capability all through that time when it comes to agentic tool use, when it comes to instruction following.
And we've been dancing around this a little bit, but I think another point and another way to increase adoption is to think about moving away from the chatbot. Chatbot is still the most predominant way to engage with AI, and it's you can understand why, right? It is a good conversational interface. Lawyers, I think, are particularly well suited to write prompts, right? We're good at engaging in written communication. We're good at giving context. We're good at explaining things to people. And so I think naturally, inherently, lawyers are sort of well suited to writing prompts. But I think generally, while the chat UI is certainly like very flexible, it's actually like the most cognitively challenging UI for users. So like Hitesh is talking about wanting to reduce friction. Again, this is like my amazing drawing, I know. There's several friction points in using a chatbot UI. And some of these exist in other forms, but really in this conversational back and forth, it's particularly acute. And one is sort of, what is the universe of options, right? If you're presented with a blank window and like a blank slate in order to engage, and these are things that can be designed around, but like, what can I even do or ask this system? Like that's the first like mental friction that exists for the user. And then of course there's like how best to prompt the system, which is a big cause of friction, we've seen tons of courses teaching lawyers how to do prompts, and those abound everywhere. And I think that's important for people to start to understand how these systems work, so that they can have comfort in the output or understand what it's good at and not good at. But that creates a friction point. And then when you get a reply, sort of having no real knowledge in the accuracy of that reply is also a friction point. There are a wide range of UIs that can be used even if you're using AI. Like a chatbot's not the only option. And I think, when we think about the universe of flexible to constrained, it's also on the same continuum of like ease of use for users, right? So the most constrained type of UI is a fully controlled UI, point and click, as we know it today. As we've used, since the development of the graphic user interface, that's the easiest for users. I click on this, it gives me something back, right? That we can understand, and we can use AI underneath that. The user doesn't have to know what's happening, but we can still put it behind a button. And the thing that's not present here is also sort of like the absence of a UI, right? Giving them the benefit of AI without UI, or with a voice UI, or some other type of UI that's not, a physical. I use physical, but that's not like a digital platform that they have to engage with. So there's a lot of options, and just a placeholder here to say, consider the universe of options when you're considering the application. We have developed like all kinds of rubrics around, when to consider which type of UI, and a lot of it depends on like how much do we know about what the user wants to do when they come into the system. But that's like a whole nother conversation on its own. Hitesh?
Yeah. And if you think about the direction of travel, the models with the reasoning models, I think O1 preview dropped in September 12th, if I remember correctly. These things are getting better at longer horizon tasks. And that's not something a chat interface is very good for, because if you're a user, these things have been out there for a couple of years now, chat interfaces. And so users have an expectation when they see a chat interface. They're going to come in, they're going to put something in, they're going to get something back, they're going to go back and forth. And it's a very low latency experience. That's what they're expecting. But with these more powerful models, especially with the reasoning models, yeah, right now everybody's entertained by the chain of thought summary or the chain of thought that's being generated. But eventually the novelty wears off. And it is incredibly tiring to use that sort of capability within a chat interface. You almost just want to give it a task and let it go off and do its thing. And so that is another reason to explore, different sort of ways of surfacing these capabilities outside of just the chat interface. We spoke a little bit about agentic solutions and their ability to sort of remove some of this friction. And I can't say this enough. Every time we drop something that makes it a little bit easier for people to either reuse the existing sort of prompts that they have put in, or not have to prompt at all, we tend to see feedback. Every time we run an experiment or push out a prototype. So yeah, it's just something to consider very deeply. chat also limits your ability to scale to different sorts of problems within the organization because you're rate limited by one individual's interaction with the system, which is obviously not ideal.
Do you think it's worth, Nicole, you kind of touched on this, maybe not this audience here, but I know there are some organizations when we talk to kind of in-house legal teams, especially, they equate AI and Copilot or generative AI and Copilot, meaning if you tested AI with their team and it wasn't great feedback because they were only using Copilot to do potentially things that aren't like a great fit for that chatbot style interface. So I think keeping in mind when you're thinking about adoption with your teams and making sure you're taking that feedback in context of what they were actually exploring. And to your point, if that was the right tool for that particular job. If you're trying to do a really complex multi-step kind of legal workflow, the best chatbots might struggle with that. So just as a reminder, as teams are sort of like taking that feedback from their organization.
Yeah, it's a great point. So the next, I think, big barrier to adoption is just mistrust of the system. This is super common, and it's inherent in in a probabilistic system, right? There are some natural skepticism that exists in the output, and lawyers like certainty on some of the things they're looking for. And I think that I really like this chart. This is from Google's People Plus AI guidebook, because it shows that like the choice whether to use generative AI or not is actually really a design decision as well, because you can use regular text, still exists and still has value in the back end. And there may be circumstances where you want to use GenAI, but a probabilistic system is not going to give your users the best experience. And if you look at this chart of like where AI is probably better or probably not better, it talks about it in a lot of it in the form of like what the user expects and what the user's experience is. So AI probably better if the user experience requires natural language interactions, but AI probably not better if the most valuable part of the core experience is its predictability, regardless of context or additional user input, right? So like the fact that so many of that Google, take it how you want, but the fact that Google puts so many of these considerations about whether or not to use AI in the context of what the user experience and expectations are, I think is really interesting because it is fundamentally a design decision. I also think that one of the considerations around mistrust is accuracy, and also how we treat the sort of availability of the system. And there's an interesting sort of double-edged sword that happens here, where if you have a tool that is not often very accurate, you're gonna lose users, of course. And if it's ever present and poorly accurate, you're really going to have people are just going to ignore it, right? That's the old Clippy model, right? Clippy was always there. He was never providing anything useful. So people just ignored Clippy and Clippy died. And so no matter what, if you have really poor accuracy, no matter how present that tool is, the tool is abandoned. But we have a really interesting, I think, maybe somewhat unique to our industry risk if you have a highly accurate system, in that like we have an autopilot risk, which is like we have a system that's so good that, and it's like always there. Say it's a redlining tool that is so good and it's always like there when you're working on a contract. So you just go like, yes, 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 insert, 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 right? That's really problematic because we need lawyers to be checking the work, right? We're not there yet where we can just say, yes, yes, yes. You need to check the work. So there is a risk there that if your accuracy is so high and that the solution is ever present, that you get the lawyers on autopilot. There is a space, like ideal space, where you are providing the feedback, providing the solution in a way that's selectively present, or and I use selectively present as like a proxy for like some kind of friction. And that is highly accurate. I think we still need to insert some kind of friction. Even like the higher accuracy goes, we need to insert some kind of friction so that the user remembers to do a check, to do a double check. And that's going to be an interesting balance. Like the more users begin to trust systems that are really good and really strong, we have to think about where do we need to insert intentional moments of friction, which is, you know, a little contrary to the things I've been saying so far. But we don't want to get into a situation where people are autopiloting. And then
Quick, we've got just a few minutes, so I want you to go back. But if there's questions, I'd love to, if there's anyone that want to put stuff in the Q&A while Nicole is doing some of these last slides here. But sorry, Nicole.
Yeah. No, it's okay. I actually didn't realize how much time we've been taking. So the other issue around mistrust is around transparency. There's a whole bunch of considerations around transparency in the UX of your AI. I know Hitesh has a lot to say on this front, but I'll just say, like, there's transparency around the source of the output, about how accurate it is, what the system can and can't do, what it's doing with your data. These are all very important. And I think, you know, this chart is a good one to consider when thinking about how transparent to be or how much information to give the user on the design side, regarding whether or not, like, they're using it just to, like, give me some ideas for an article for, you know, corporate counsel on this. You know, there we probably need less transparency, less, you know, if that's sort of the purpose, if it's like a content generation. If it's like you know, help me draft a first draft of a X thing, then when we get more towards, like, attempting to perfect an output, I think we need higher transparency in systems like that, so that people understand, like, where's it getting it from, what's the source, and all of that. So there's a lot of transparency considerations, and I think it really depends on what the solution is doing. Hitesh?
Sure. So, you know, things like source provenance, citations, reasoning traces, these are all table stakes at this point, but they're also not free. So some model providers will provide source citations directly from the API, which is great. But, you know, even if they don't, you have to sort of do the work if you're designing these systems to make sure you express that. And again, like I said, it's not free. If you're directly asking a model to cite the text that it relied on, it could still hallucinate the citation. We've seen instances of that. So that requires sort of thinking about what it is you actually want to cite, designing around that, and sort of doing what you can to mitigate that risk. You know, one thing that has sort of helped us move as quickly as we have is, you know, running really robust evaluations and tests against the AI component specifically. Because, you know, this again goes back to the sort of paradigm shift where you're not necessarily looking for bugs. You almost have to run these things dozens of times just to see if they're going to behave. In many ways, it's like learning to ride a horse, right? Like you've got to tame the AI. You've got to get the dream machine to dream the way you want it to dream. And if your evals and tests are saturated, you should just build harder ones, because that is the thing to do. Lastly, I'll just say that hallucination, again, is something that there's a lot of techniques out there to mitigate. I don't think it's something that you can completely remove. You can sort of restrict it, constrain it, provide signal in different ways. Things like confidence scores to sort of let the user know when they need to sort of maybe double check. But yeah, there are ways to sort of make this something that is transparent, reliable, gets the answer that the user expects most of the time, but also provide pathways for the user to sort of really double check and be absolutely certain, especially in those scenarios like Nicole was alluding to, where you need higher transparency just because of the nature of the work. Back to you, Nicole.
I think that covers what we are able to cover within the time. Alex, do you have anything you want to sort of cap it off with?
Sure. Well, thank you both for sharing this. We will share this deck out with everyone as well as make the recording available. The webinar technically stops here at the quarter past or quarter before. We can stay on a little longer if people have any specific questions. And so I would encourage anyone to put in the Q&A here if you've got questions for any of our panelists. Maybe just to kind of kick that off, I know some of the people on this may not be in a position where they're actually designing solutions or building technology, but they might be responsible for implementing technology within their organizations or the procurement or vetting different vendors. Do you all have any sort of advice of, like, how they could be thinking about UX if they're not necessarily in control of those kind of actual design decisions?
Yeah, so I mean, we've done a number of like engagements with organizations to sort of work with them and their teams to understand like how the lawyers, like even like generating use cases, right? Like even that can be a barrier. And so sometimes they'll get the tools and they'll even need to like have some help in thinking about how to even leverage the tools and how lawyers are feeling about the tools. And so you can do your own user research with off-the-shelf solutions, right? Like you can bring an off-the-shelf solution in, run demos with internally, and do your own internal user research to see like, are the use cases there? Are they going to be valuable? Is this something that we think is going to integrate well into the workflows of the people who are intended to use it?
Can I ask you, actually, Nicole, just to keep going a little on that, just because one of the questions here was, what's the best way to engage users in providing this valuable feedback that powers these insights?
It's funny. I get asked that question so much because lawyers are busy and people who work in-house are really busy. And so I do think that typically when we do user research, we like to do one-on-one to sort of have an opportunity to ask a lot of open-ended questions. And Alex, I know you're sort of a pro at that. But we've found that running like workshops is actually a really good way to get everyone together and thinking about the same things. And I think lawyers in their day-to-day jobs don't have a lot of opportunity to be creative. And when there's something that does happen when you get them into a room and you say, okay, you've got an hour and a half, we're going to be exploring opportunities with this, we're going to be trying things out, we're going to be playing around with these solutions. Something happens where they really like rise up to the experience of being creative. And we have gotten such great output from running workshops, like running team workshops. We have a hard time getting law firm lawyers on one-on-one calls. We have a hard time getting in-house teams on one-on-one calls, but somehow they all show up to like a 1-hour workshop or an hour and a half workshop because it's sort of exciting and engaging. It's an opportunity for them to be together. The other thing I would say is like, if you have like clients in the room or like the business in the room too, like bring those two people together to sort of workshop things. There's even more motivation to be there and to work hard and to think about the difficult things.
Hitesh, you wanted to add anything in terms
Yeah,
of kind of eliciting feedback? I certainly, as someone who's often in charge of trying to convert feedback into solutions, any tips?
yeah, no, absolutely. I think for us when we sort of tackle things from a more research perspective, it's important for us to run lots of experiments, and that's what we try to do. And very often we leave the experiments running for a really long time just to try to understand what sorts of failure modes people are seeing with these solutions. And that helps us inform how we might denoise like the overall system design to sort of surface, maybe a specific artifact that people want to see from a solution, or maybe something that we thought was helpful going in just because it was a capability that we were able to research and sort of make work isn't helpful. And so it's super important to sort of do that sort of real testing and not sort of develop these things in a vacuum. The other thing I'll say just really quickly around like implementation or like purchase decisions, it's worth interrogating the solution provider on all of these things. Like, what are you doing to mitigate hallucinations? What is your approach to sort of surfacing reasoning traces? Like, and also understand your expectations. If you want to use this for complex tasks, then you probably should, given the direction of travel. What is the solution provider doing to actually resolve that task? Is it just like a single pass through a model? That's unlikely to scale to all sorts of things. So, yeah.
Yeah. Got another question here. What's your take on integrating AI UX into native Office apps? All right, great. Next question.
Thumbs up is my
for,
take.
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that you can integrate into what users are natively using, I think that's the way to go. And I think sort of integrating it natively is great. I think, we have even like, also because it provides more context, right? Like the more context you can provide the systems, the better. And so if you're like in natively something you're working on, you're already providing more context to the system. And then like, if you can also add voice to it, and then you can add more context. If you can add like, the more we can add to the system, like the better it's going to perform for you. And so I think that, I think that's the best path for most working legal professionals, is something that's well integrated into their workflow. A+.
I think removing roadblocks in all senses of the word is kind of like priority one in a lot of these ways. So if it's where they are working, that's great. We heard a sort of a sheepish, silly insight from an in-house team that they were talking about providing Copilot training, but they actually needed to start before that and show people where the button was to get Copilot installed. Like, and that's a real, you need to meet users where they are, exactly where they are, and help them get through kind of those early hurdles so that you can actually get into the meat of it. So
as a new Microsoft user, I can co-sign all of that. So
it's tricky. Let's see. I would love if there's any other questions. While maybe there's typing. For me, kind of there's three takeaways that I heard from this conversation I think are really helpful. I think one is very much what we just shared, right? AI has to fit into the existing workflow and not force people to change how they do their work. The more behavior change you ask, the less likely we're going to do it. We are all busy enough to have to worry about changing platforms, or certainly learning new platforms. So the more that it is integrated into your workflow, whether that's literally within the platform that you're using, or at least as close to how you do your work, the more likely they're going to adopt it. I think this idea of chatbots are not kind of the only AI, and they are also not the best AI experience is very helpful. It's familiar. It is useful in some situations, but not all of them. So being thoughtful around what tasks you're trying to elicit AI usage, and being thoughtful of if that's something that actually needs something more structured or embedded. And then finally, trust is everything, and that transparency is critical in helping to build that trust. So if you asked a human expert for a piece of advice, if they just gave you that hot take and gave you no context on where it came from, you're going to be less likely to trust it, especially with something with like a lot of the AI tools. So making sure that they understand.
You're not referring to my first slide, my graph based on nothing, are you?
What do you mean?
You said if you ask an expert and they give you advice that's based on nothing, and I had my one chart that was based on nothing.
That was great. No, you had shared your sources with me earlier, so I fully vet that chart. I know that it is completely accurate. So, any other questions? Let's see. How do you push the envelope of innovation if you keep meeting users where they are, as opposed to challenging them just a little bit? That's a very fun question.
That's a great question. And I don't think those two I don't think those two fight each other at all. I think that you can keep innovating in ways that are still going to be useful for the user. I don't think you need to ask users to do backflips in order to innovate and to keep pushing. I think if you ask the users to do backflips, then you're just not thinking fully enough about the experience.
Yeah. How innovative a solution isn't inversely correlated with how intuitive it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when we work with teams, especially kind of in a training type environment, I think of this maybe in the sense of the workflow exists, and it is sort of, we'll call it static. And innovation is more about challenging them to push the goalposts of where they turn from AI to their own work. And so if they were saying, great, I got something from Copilot, I got something from ChatGPT, now I'm going to go off and do something with it, challenging them to say, like, could you ask the AI to actually just do a little bit further down the stream, or ask it to do a little bit more than you were previously asking it to do, I think is a helpful way that's not challenging how they work. It's just saying, like, can you try to push the bounds a little on where that sort of AI to human shift might be, or where you're going to say, that's great raw data, but now I need to do some hard thinking about it. Could it help you with some of that hard thinking? So.
And I think all those like change management things, like these are all design problems, right? We can design for them and design to move people forward in like increments that we need to, if that's a necessary part of whatever this innovation is that we think that isn't quite meeting people where they are right now. Like it's all just part of the design challenge.
Right. Nicole and Hitesh, thank you so much. I really appreciate your insights on this. Do you have any other parting kind of requests of the group as they go off into their kind of challenging legal AI UX worlds?
I would just say to be critical about UX and UI, whether you're purchasing or you're buying. Think about design. Don't just like autopilot the design. I think there's a tendency to focus on the tech right now, but you have to think about what you're building as a product and as a product that's going to be used by humans, and just make sure that that stays top of mind. Don't get sucked into like only thinking about how cool the tech is, and it's tempting because it is very cool.
Yeah, building on that, the tech is in the product, right? The outcome is. So always focus on the outcomes that any solution is able to give you, whether it uses like the most complicated system or not. You don't need a hammer for everything.
Yeah. I think my parting thought is, like you mentioned, Nicole, I come from kind of a product research background, and for me, context is everything. And so being very thoughtful about and being critical and asking questions of like, what is the context that our users are working in? What is it that they're actually trying to do, expanding beyond just the narrow kind of myopic view of the task, but the task in context of what, in service of what larger sort of goal? What are the contextual pieces around the other platforms that something might interact with after they go from Word, then they go to a different platform, or after they come up with a concept, what do they do with that concept? So I think that's a part of UX, is not just kind of the how someone might use a tool, but using the tool in a broader context of their job or their day or their task. So,
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all again for participating. Appreciate it. We will send out the recording. I believe we can send out the deck as well with that information, and hopefully see some of you in other events.
Thank you.
All right.